where we can look at an ancient civilization that used to exist, and we know that this is like a truly lost civilization. And what I mean by that is, we call the Olmecs.
They sat buried in the suffocating mud of the Mexican Gulf Coast, staring into the dark with eyes wide, blank, and completely unblinking for 3,000 years. 17 massive stone heads carved from solid volcanic rock, weighing up to 40 tons each, holding a secret that traditional archaeology simply couldn't unlock. However, a team of researchers fed ultra-high-resolution 3D scans of these monoliths into a deep-learning neural network, and the machine saw something we missed. The faces are finally talking, and scientists got them decoded. The rubber people. It's 1862. A local worker is clearing land in the sweltering, mosquito-infested lowlands of Tres Zapotes. His machete strikes something extraordinarily dense, buried deep within the rich, black volcanic soil. He thinks it's an iron kettle, maybe a buried chest of Spanish gold. He starts digging, throwing wet earth over his shoulder, sweat stinging his eyes. But as the mud falls away, he isn't looking at gold. He is looking into a pair of colossal, humanoid eyes carved from a single massive block of basalt. It was a face so massive, so imposing, that it felt completely alien to the local landscape. This was the world's first introduction to the Olmec, the rubber people, a civilization that predated the Maya and the Aztecs by centuries. They were the true dawn culture of Mesoamerica, establishing complex religious systems, writing, and massive urban centers, while Western Europe was still figuring out basic bronze casting. Yet, despite their immense influence, they left behind no written history that we can easily read, no sweeping epics, and no names for their kings. All they left were their monuments. And chief among them were these 17 colossal heads scattered across major ancient hubs like San Lorenzo, La Venta, and Tres Zapotes. The sheer physical reality of these structures is enough to make your mind melt. We are talking about solid blocks of volcanic basalt, some standing nearly 10 feet tall and weighing up to 40 tons. That is the equivalent of trying to move 20 mid-sized cars packed into a single seamless lump of rock. And here is the kicker. There is absolutely no volcanic stone native to the swampy floodplains where these heads were discovered. The nearest source of basalt is the Tuxtla Mountains, located over 50 miles away through impassable, treacherous terrain. Think about the sheer logistics of that for a second. The Olmec didn't have beasts of burden. They had no oxen, no horses, and no wheeled carts to roll these monsters across the landscape. To get these stones to their final resting places, hundreds of people had to haul them through dense, predator-filled jungles, drag them up steep mountain passes, and float them on fragile wooden rafts across raging, unpredictable rivers. It was a monumental, multi-generational investment of sheer human willpower and physical labor. You don't put that much effort into a project unless the message you are carving into that stone is absolutely vital to the survival of your empire. For over a century, traditional archaeology did everything it could to decipher that message. Scientists measured the noses with calipers, calculated the angles of the lips, and traced the faint lines of the strange, tight-fitting helmets worn by each face. But human hands and human eyes have limitations. The humid, acidic jungle environment is incredibly hostile to ancient artifacts, and centuries of micro-erosion, tropical rains, and invasive plant roots have slowly eaten away at the stone. To the naked eye, the finer details of these faces have been completely erased, leaving behind smooth, ambiguous contours that sparked decades of fierce, unresolved academic debates. Who were these people? Were they rulers, warriors, or something else entirely? For generations, the heads remained frustratingly silent, keeping their secrets locked tight beneath a layer of weathered, gray stone. But what if the details weren't actually gone? What if they were just waiting for an eye that could see in the dark, feeding the stones to the machine? To break a 3,000-year-old silence, you have to look closer than human biology allows. That is exactly what changed when a specialized team of data scientists and computation archaeologists decided to stop looking at the Olmec heads through traditional camera lenses and instead handed the raw data over to an advanced deep learning neural network. The process started with sub-millimeter LiDAR and structured light photogrammetry. Essentially, researchers bombarded the massive basalt structures with billions of precise laser pulses from every conceivable angle. This created a digital point cloud so incredibly dense that it captured variations in the stone's surface, measuring less than the thickness of a human hair. To the naked eye, a weathered block of basalt looks relatively smooth, rounded out by centuries of tropical humidity and torrential downpours. But to a machine, that surface is a wildly complex landscape of microscopic peaks, valleys, and ridges. The team used a custom convolutional neural network, CNN, a type of AI specifically trained to recognize patterns in visual data, and fed it the raw 3D coordinate maps of all 17 colossal heads. The first step was a process called algorithmic texture stripping. The AI was instructed to mathematically calculate the exact rate of environmental erosion based on the specific mineral composition of the Tuxtla Mountain basalt and the unique microclimates of the recovery sites like La Venta and San Lorenzo.
The earliest Olmec capital, San Lorenzo, constituted the first Mesoamerican city. After San Lorenzo's decline, La Venta was the next major capital.
Once the machine understood how the jungle had degraded the stone over 3 millennia, it did something incredible. It began to peel back the layers of time. The software systematically reversed the effects of wind, water, and acidic soil, digitally reconstructing the sharp edges and crisp lines that had been softened by the ages. It was like wiping a fogged-up window to reveal a crystal-clear image on the other side. What emerged on the computer monitors wasn't a collection of generic, weathered shapes, but a hyper-detailed map of human craftsmanship that had been invisible to the human eye for centuries. The machine immediately began cataloging things we had completely missed. It identified thousands of distinct micro-impact zones across the surfaces of the faces. By analyzing the directional vector and depth of these tiny indentations, the AI could differentiate between natural wear and tear and the deliberate, rhythmic strikes of ancient artisans. It mapped out the exact types of tools used to shape the basalt. The neural network proved that the Olmec weren't just randomly pounding the rock with harder stones. They were utilizing a sophisticated hierarchy of tools, ranging from heavy, dense basalt percussors for bulk material removal to incredibly fine, sharp jadeite chisels and abrasive quartz sands for delicate facial detailing. Even more fascinating, the algorithm tracked the specific signature of individual carvers. Just like a human forensic examiner can identify a person's handwriting by the unique slant and pressure of their pen, the AI began grouping specific tool marks together. It revealed that a single colossal head wasn't just carved by a nameless mass of laborers, but was orchestrated by master sculptors who possessed distinct, recognizable styles. The machine could tell you where one artisan's work ended and another's began, tracing the digital ghost of a master craftsman who lived and breathed during the dawn of Mesoamerica. By pulling away the veil of time, the neural network converted these static monuments into dynamic, living datasets. It was no longer just about looking at a giant stone face. It was about reading the literal muscle memory of the people who created them. The machine had successfully translated the physical textures of the basalt into a digital language, setting the stage for an even more radical experiment. Could these newly recovered details finally reveal the true identity of the people behind the stone? The ancestral blueprint, decoding the craniometrics. With a pristine, mathematically restored dataset of the 17 colossal heads loaded into the system, the research team pushed the neural network into uncharted territory. For decades, the true identity of the Olmec had been a battleground for wild theories and fierce academic debates. Because the heads feature wide noses, thick lips, and distinct facial structures, early explorers and alternative historians loved to speculate about distant transoceanic migrations from Africa or Asia. Traditional archaeologists rightly pushed back, pointing out that these features naturally mirror the indigenous populations living in the Mexican Gulf Coast today. But these arguments were always based on subjective visual interpretations. The AI was brought in to remove the guesswork entirely. using a branch of data science known as computational craniometrics. The data scientists trained a specialized neural network on a massive global database of human skull morphology, which included structural data from thousands of ancient and modern populations across every continent. The algorithm was programmed to identify 84 distinct craniofacial landmarks on the digital models of the Olmec heads. Things like the exact ratio between the orbital sockets, the precise curvature of the zygomatic arch, the cheekbone, the depth of the nasal root, and the specific projection of the jawline. These aren't superficial features that change with weight or age. They are the fundamental structural markers dictated by genetic ancestry. Once the AI mapped these 84 points across all 17 statues, it stripped away the artistic styling of the stone and ran a massive comparative analysis. It didn't just look at the surface. It calculated the underlying bone structure required to create those specific facial planes. The machine compared the Olmec structural blueprints against the global database, executing millions of cross-matching simulations per second to find the closest statistical fit. The results returned by the neural network were definitive, putting an end to a century of wild speculation. The AI found zero statistical correlation between the facial structures of the colossal heads and ancient populations from Africa, Europe, or Asia. Instead, the machine identified a near-perfect structural match with the ancient and modern indigenous populations of Mesoamerica. Specifically, the craniometric data mapped directly to the early branch of the Mixozoquean language family, the very people who have inhabited the lowlands of southern Mexico for thousands of years. But the machine didn't stop at a broad regional match. It began to uncover subtle variations between the heads themselves. By grouping the craniometric profiles of the 17 statues, the AI revealed that they weren't all sculpted from a single static genetic template. There was an incredibly high degree of morphological diversity locked within the collection. The algorithm tracked variations in skull breadth and nasal positioning that perfectly align with a highly connected cosmopolitan ancient society. It showed that the Olmec heartland wasn't an isolated bubble. It was a dynamic melting pot where different localized lineages from across the isthmus of Tehuantepec converged, intermingled, and rose to power. The implications of this genetic mapping are profound. The AI effectively proved that the Olmec artists weren't trying to depict some idealized, faraway god or a mythical race of foreign travelers. They were looking directly at their own people, capturing the authentic, raw, physical geometry of their own community. The neural network essentially acted as a digital time machine, verifying that the founders of Mesoamerica's mother culture were entirely homegrown, evolving their sophisticated art and architecture straight from the rich soil of the Mexican Gulf Coast. Yet, this discovery opened up an even more intriguing question for the research team. If these colossal heads were deeply rooted in the local population, why did the artists go to such extreme, agonizing lengths to capture such specific, highly distinct facial features for every single monument? Was it possible that these weren't generic representations of the local population at all, but highly personalized snapshots of specific historical individuals? Individual faces, or imperial propaganda? When you look at the 17 colossal heads lined up in a museum or a digital database, your brain naturally groups them together as a single collective monument to Olmec power. But when the neural network analyzed the restored, micro-detailed facial planes, it completely shattered this idea of uniformity. In traditional art history, ancient rulers are almost always depicted through the lens of idealized perfection. Think of the Egyptian pharaohs or the Roman emperors. Their statues are often smooth, symmetric, and mathematically perfected to project a sense of flawless, godlike authority. But the Olmec, as the AI discovered, operated on a completely different philosophical wavelength. They weren't carving gods, they were carving real, flawed human beings. The neural network was tasked with running a deep asymmetry analysis across all 17 digital models. In nature, no human face is perfectly symmetrical. One eye is always slightly higher than the other. A nostril might be wider, or a cheekbone might protrude at a fractionally different angle. When the AI mapped the facial symmetry of the Olmec heads, it found a staggering level of deliberate, non-random asymmetry. The artists hadn't made mistakes. They had gone out of their way to replicate highly specific, individual human quirks in solid volcanic rock. One of the most jaw-dropping discoveries came from San Lorenzo Head 3. When humans look at this monument, they see a powerful, imposing face. But when the algorithm cross-referenced the alignment of the orbital sockets and the precise directional vectors of the carved irises, it flagged a distinct physical anomaly: strabismus, commonly known as crossed eyes. To the naked eye, this detail just looks like a slight distortion of the stone. To the machine, it was a precise, anatomically correct rendering of a real medical condition. Far from being seen as a defect, this trait was actually highly revered in later Mesoamerican cultures, often associated with a divine connection to the gods. The Olmec artist hadn't cleaned up the ruler's appearance. They had immortalized his specific physical condition as a badge of honor. As the AI dug deeper into the dataset, it began finding clues of aging and physical trauma across multiple heads. On La Venta Monument 1, the neural network highlighted subtle, intentional sagging around the jowls, deep nasolabial folds, the laugh lines running from the nose to the mouth, and micro-carved bags under the eyes. This was the portrait of a man who had reached old age, his face weathered by decades of political rule and spiritual responsibility. On another head, the machine detected a slight flattening of the nasal bridge and localized scar tissue patterns around the brow line, consistent with a blunt force injury a warrior might sustain in hand-to-hand combat. This level of hyperrealism tells us something incredible about the true nature of these monuments. The colossal heads weren't generic symbols of an imperial office. They were highly personalized individual portraits of real historical people. They were the kings, the dynastic lords, and the heavy-hitting warlords who held the reins of Olmec society between 1200 and 400 BCE. When a ruler died, or when they achieved a monumental victory, their likeness was carved into the indestructible basalt to lock their specific identity into the physical landscape forever. It was the ultimate form of ancient political propaganda. By placing these hyper-realistic, larger-than-life portraits in the middle of massive public plazas, the Olmec elite were making a terrifyingly clear statement to anyone who walked by. We are not abstract concepts. We are real men. We are watching you, and our power is as permanent as this mountain stone. But the personalization didn't stop with the folds of their skin or the shape of their eyes. As the neural network moved its focus upward, away from the raw flesh of the faces, it locked onto the strangest, most complex feature of every single colossal head. What was the meaning behind the bizarre, tightly fitting helmets that wrapped around the skulls of these ancient titans? The helmet enigma, what the neural nets spotted. If the faces themselves tell the story of real living human beings, the strange, skull-hugging headgear they wear introduces an entirely different level of complexity.
Do they universally wear these helmets?
They pretty much all wear these helmets in the Olmec stonework. There's another fascinating figure from La Venta, one of the Olmec sites.
For generations, people just called them helmets, or ball-player caps, assuming they were basic protective gear used in the famous Mesoamerican ritual ball game. But when you hand these patterns over to a machine capable of analyzing thousands of geometric variables simultaneously, the simple sports cap theory completely falls apart. The neural network looked at the helmets not as passive clothing, but as a complex, encoded graphic language. The AI began by isolating the headgear of all 17 heads, flattening the three-dimensional curves into two-dimensional vector maps. It then ran a clustering algorithm to cross-reference these patterns with every known symbol in the Olmec iconographic catalog, ranging from pottery stamps and jade celts to full-scale rock carvings across Mesoamerica. What the machine found was a highly standardized, non-random system of heraldry. Each helmet was unique, acting like a digital thumbprint or an ancient coat of arms that belonged exclusively to the individual wearing it. On some of the San Lorenzo heads, the neural network detected faint, interlocking geometric grids that human eyes had long dismissed as simple decorative cross-hatching. The algorithm, however, identified a precise spatial correlation between these grids and early Mesoamerican astronomical markers. The lines weren't random. They mapped out specific celestial alignments, potentially linking that specific ruler to a particular constellation or a cosmic event, like a solar eclipse that occurred during their reign. It's as if the king wasn't just claiming to rule the land, but was wearing the literal map of the night sky on his head to prove his divine right to the throne. On other monuments, the AI flagged highly stylized abstract animal motifs hidden within the bands of the helmets. It mapped out the unmistakable jagged contours of the jaguar's cleft head, the sharp serrated teeth of the harpy eagle, and the undulating scales of the crocodilian earth monster. These weren't just artistic doodles. In ancient Mesoamerica, top-tier predators were deeply tied to shamanic transformation and political authority. By using deep learning to isolate these hidden animal crests, the researchers realized that each helmet was a visual declaration of a ruler's personal spirit guardian. A king wearing the jaguar crest was telling his subjects that he possessed the stealth, power, and night vision of the jungle's ultimate apex predator. But the AI spotted something even more radical when it analyzed the physical construction of the helmets as rendered in the stone. By looking at the depth of the ridges and the way the fabric of the headgear overlapped, the machine simulated the material properties of the actual real-world objects the statues were copying. The algorithm concluded that these weren't metal or solid wood helmets. The physical physics models suggested thick, multi-layered layouts of heavy quilted cotton, bound together with stiff leather straps and reinforced with braided cords. This material breakdown points to a dual purpose. In the brutal world of formative period warfare, where enemies fought with heavy wooden clubs and razor-sharp obsidian blades, these quilted cotton helmets would have provided legitimate, life-saving protection against crushing blows to the skull. But by overlaying these protective helmets with intricate astronomical maps and predatory crests, the Olmec transformed basic battle gear into a towering symbol of state power. When an Olmec lord stepped onto the temple platform, his helmet would catch the tropical sun, flashing his lineage, his military achievements, and his connection to the cosmos to thousands of onlookers below. The helmets were the ultimate bridge between the physical and the spiritual world. But as the neural network finished mapping the individual details of the faces and their gear, the researchers decided to zoom out. They wanted to look at the bigger picture.
As the first major and oldest civilization of the Americas, they were located in the tropical lowlands in the Gulf of Mexico. 17 heads in total have been recovered from the 3 sites.
What happens when you look at these 17 giant heads not as isolated statues, but as a connected, deliberate network spanning across the entire landscape? The Lost Network. When you look at the colossal heads as individual museum pieces, you miss the grand architectural chess game the Olmec were playing across the landscape. The research team decided to take the high-resolution digital models of all 17 heads and drop them into a massive AI-driven Geographic Information System (GIS) simulation. The machine wasn't just looking at the stones, it was analyzing the entire topography of the Mexican Gulf Coast as it existed 3,000 years ago, reconstructing ancient river channels, shifting coastlines, and long-buried mountain ridges. The objective was to see if the placement of these 40-ton monuments followed a hidden, algorithmic logic. The neural network instantly flagged a fascinating pattern. The heads were never dropped randomly. When the AI ran a viewshed analysis, a calculation that determines what can be seen from any specific point on a map, it revealed that the monuments were placed to create a highly sophisticated, interlocking matrix of visual power. If you stood at the site of a specific colossal head in the urban core of San Lorenzo, the machine proved that your direct line of sight would cut through the humid haze to align perfectly with the next head down the line, or with a major sacred mountain peak on the distant horizon. They were essentially acting as a giant territorial neural network of political and spiritual control. The AI simulated how the sun would strike the polished, dark basalt surfaces of the heads at different times of the year. During the summer solstice, the dawn light would hit the face of a specific Western monument, casting a massive, elongated shadow that pointed directly toward the palace of the living king. This wasn't just art. It was large-scale landscape engineering. The heads were cosmic anchors, turning entire floodplains into a living canvas where the movements of the sky were directly tethered to the faces of the earthly rulers. This spatial network also completely redefines how we look at the legendary Olmec trade routes. The AI mapped out the most energy-efficient paths for transporting these 40-ton stones from the Tuxtla Mountains, analyzing water buoyancy, river currents, and seasonal mud consistency. The results suggested that the heads were systematically positioned at critical choke points along these waterways, the ancient equivalent of highway toll booths or border checkpoints. Imagine floating down an ancient, winding river on a trading canoe, surrounded by nothing but dense, suffocating jungle. Suddenly, the trees clear, and you are staring up at a towering 40-ton stone face wearing a combat helmet, looking directly down at your boat. You wouldn't need a written sign to know exactly whose territory you were entering. The AI proved that the heads were serving an incredibly practical, geopolitical function. They were permanent, indestructible boundary markers that projected the psychological presence of the king to the outermost edges of the empire. But this discovery raised a whole new layer of speculation for the research team. If these stones were designed to dominate the landscape and project a living presence, what did they actually look like when they were fresh from the sculptor's chisel? To human eyes, the gray, muted basalt looks ancient and weathered. But the machine was about to reveal that the past was a lot more colorful and a lot more intense than we ever imagined. What happened when the AI was ordered to put the literal flesh back on the stone? The flesh on the stone. To truly bring the Olmec lords out of the shadows of the deep past, the data scientists pushed the neural network to its absolute limit. They initiated a predictive phenotypic rendering protocol, essentially instructing the AI to use the recovered craniometric blueprints, micro-texture mappings, and regional genetic data to construct a fully realized, three-dimensional digital human being from each stone monument. The machine wasn't just guessing, it was utilizing advanced anatomical algorithms to layer muscle tissue, fat deposits, and skin over the structural geometry of the basalt faces. The first major revelation came when the AI analyzed the micro-fissures in the stone for chemical traces of ancient pigments. Under extreme magnification and algorithmic filtering, the neural network detected microscopic residues of iron oxide, cinnabar, and charcoal locked deep within the porous volcanic rock. The heads weren't always the cold, slate-gray color we see in museums today. 3,000 years ago, they were exploding with vibrant, almost terrifying color. The AI's rendering showed that the Olmec artists coated the faces in smooth, dark ochre slips, mimicking a deep, sun-bronzed skin tone. The lips were stained with brilliant red cinnabar, and the deep inset irises were painted with pitch-black charcoal, making the eyes appear stark, reflective, and fiercely alive under the tropical sun. The helmets were painted in contrasting shades of cream, yellow, and deep blue-green, highlighting the intricate geometric heraldry and animal crests so they could be seen from hundreds of yards away across a crowded plaza. When the machine finished rendering the organic layers over San Lorenzo Head 1, the laboratory monitors didn't display an ancient artifact. They displayed a living, breathing man. The AI revealed a leader in his late 40s, possessing an incredibly powerful, thick jawline and deep-set, piercing eyes that exuded a quiet, absolute authority. The fine lines around his mouth and the slight asymmetry of his brow gave him a distinct, individualized expression, a mix of weathered wisdom and military steel. The software simulated how the humid, ambient light of the Gulf Coast would reflect off his painted skin, capturing the wet sheen of sweat on his forehead as he stood before his people. You could see the subtle variations in skin texture, the faint stubble along the jawline, and the specific contour of the cartilage in his ears, which had been stretched by heavy jade ear spools. Seeing these faces in full, vivid color completely changes our psychological connection to the Olmec. For centuries, we viewed them as distant, almost mythical entities, mysterious carvers lost to the fog of time. But the AI stripped away that distance. It forced researchers to look into the eyes of actual individuals who laughed, fought, grew old, and made decisions that shaped the trajectory of an entire continent. These were the living architects of Mesoamerican civilization, brought back to life down to the very wrinkles on their skin. The hyper-realistic digital avatars created by the machine didn't just humanize the past, they provided a vital, undeniable link between the ancient world and the present day. When the team compared the completed AI facial profiles with modern indigenous communities currently living in the Veracruz and Tabasco regions, the screens showed an undeniable, unbroken continuity of human life. The exact same high cheekbones, heavy eyelids, and proud, sweeping nasal profiles are still walking those same lands today. As the final renderings flashed across the screen, the immense scale of the Olmec achievement became undeniably clear. But the experiment was drawing to its close, leaving the team with one final, profound realization about the relationship between modern technology and ancient history. What does it mean for our future when the most advanced machines we've ever built are the only things capable of truly understanding our oldest ancestors? Share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear from you, too. From ancient stone to modern AI, the Olmec heads reveal secrets that continue to amaze. Subscribe now to uncover more history with us. Thanks for watching.